What's up? This is Jacob and this is the Anti-Reg podcast. I'm here today with Assembl and Sebastian Mellen, who's going to talk about how to democratize science.
Exactly, yeah. Hi there, Jacob. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me on. um, right now at Assembl, what we're doing is essentially building decentralized and censorship-resistant networks for science. One of the problems that we come across quite often in science is that there's no effective framework to share scientific data with. And so a lot of science is focused on the publication end, and that means that right now most of the scientific studies that are completed are focused on the final end product, which means the PDFs or the manuscripts that get published, and this is what Elsevier publishes or Open Access Journal publishes. And these are all important movements to have. We need the open access journals and we need open science in the final product. But a thing that hasn't been addressed so much is how open science will actually address the back-end problems of science, which have to do with the data behind science. And data is actually sort of the meat of science. So everything that you see that comes out of science, every conclusion that's made, it's made because there's a pool of data to draw upon. And this data is then analyzed by the scientists, it's then written about, and then published in a presentable format. But it's important to have this back-end data as well for a few reasons. Perhaps the most important is so that scientists can reuse other scientists' work and sort of build larger and larger networks and meshes of data where they can more effectively analyze the data that's being collected, either with machine learning tools or independently on their own. And for the public, because oftentimes the public is financing these scientific studies, and it's very important for the public to be able to see what is actually happening behind the science that they're paying to publish. And when we get access to the back end, the science is essentially much more open, and it's better for the science and it's better for the public. And then there are also many smaller issues, which I don't have to get into too in depth, that open data will address, and one of them is also p-value hacking, for example, or extrapolation from small amounts of data.
What is p-value hacking? What is that?
P-value hacking is essentially, I will take a large amount of data as a scientist, and I will only select that piece of the data which looks most beneficial to me. So let's say I took a sample of 1,000 people, and I analyzed them for depression, and I wanted to show that no one in my city had depression. And out of these 1,000 people, 38 people had depression. Well, I could just cut the sample size in half for the 500 people who didn't have depression and make sure that none of them had depression, or maybe include one or two to make it look more true or accurate of the real situation, and then publish that as my results.
So basically just keep doing the experiment until you get the result you want.
Exactly. That's a more concise way to phrase it, yeah.
Okay.
And so when you keep doing things like this, you can essentially manufacture any result that you want for any piece of science, because whenever you have something that's statistical, you're going to get anomalies. And so if you can pick out the anomalies that are most beneficial to you or to your cause, you're going to really be able to completely change what the science is representing.
It's basically fake science then.
Exactly. It's really fake science.
And Taleb and his crew talk a lot about this.
Exactly. Nassim Taleb, yeah, he's a real hardcore guy on p-value hacking, and especially some of those problems in science. And I think he definitely has the right idea. So actually, to bring in Taleb a bit into this discussion, when we have a network like this, that's a sort of a decentralized mesh is what we're building. It's built on something called the interplanetary file system. What we end up with is a censorship-resistant network that's actually anti-fragile. And so what that means is that it's resistant to attack, and every time it gets attacked, it actually gets stronger in the way that we're building it, which means that let's say you have 3 universities that are connected, and one of these universities' nodes go down. Well, the other 2 universities will then aggressively start duplicating each other's data in the anticipation of a broader scale network outage or attack. And so this is an important,
really smart.
Yeah, it's a really important attribute to have in a network like this. And whenever you have a network of any type, it's really important to have the back-end infrastructure be solid and be completely open. And so the networks that we have in science right now, in other words, if I want to access your data, your scientific data, depending on the country, the process is very different. So that's the first problem. There's no standardized method for collecting the data on the back end of studies. But more than the standardization issue, we have issues of non-accessibility. So let's say I wanted to have the back-end data on a study that was completed in a far-off country, in Kazakhstan, in Taiwan, let's say. I would actually have to, in many cases, visit the local libraries in these countries, or the university libraries, request the data, wait for some period of time until the researcher gets back to me, and then the researcher would transmit me the data on a USB drive or a hard drive, or copy it over to my computer while I'm there, and then I would only then have the raw data to verify the back end of the study, or not just to verify, but also to build upon, because oftentimes in science, science has become a very linear process, and so there's this concept that every experiment is different, every experiment needs its own data collection, and while that's true, it's not bad to have a large pool of data to pull from whenever you're doing any study, especially so that you can verify that you are not the anomaly. So this is sort of p-value hacking, but on a much broader level, because when you have studies that have particularly extraordinary results, oftentimes they are the ones that will get published. But that's actually problematic, because this is a problem that's not talked about at all. It's not just p-value hacking on the back end, it's p-value hacking on the front end, based on what reviewers, this is peer reviewers, approve of, or based on what may seem the most amazing or outstanding result. And so whenever you can sort of do a mass analysis, not just on local p-value hacking, but on broad-scale p-value hacking, you make the networks extremely redundant, and you make the internal scientific process and broader scientific process that the public has exposure to far more resistant to maladaption or control by a small group which wants to only publish studies on a certain topic. And I'm just going to finish this out with one example, which is Monsanto. I'm sure we're all familiar with the name Monsanto. Many people have different opinions on it, but there are recorded cases in the U.S. of Monsanto actually partnering with universities and affecting the outcome of studies, and then those studies would go on to be published in reputable journals. But the back end of this process was never looked into, and oftentimes when you have studies like this that are manipulated, there's no transparency on the back end. And so transparency on the back end of science, and really forcing a movement of transparency in science, is what we're going for at Assembl, because that's the most important thing and the biggest issue we see right now.
It's so important, also because science is used as a justification for everything these days, and it's sort of like you can just slap the label of science on something, and then you can't question anything.
That's a very good point, and it's very strange as well, because the scientific discipline, I mean, at its core, the philosophy of science is really based on the philosophy of questioning everything. You cannot be sure of anything, so you have to question every result, everything you're told, everything you're parroted at, or you're told by someone else. And so science, as you said, has become a kind of a bludgeoning tool. People oftentimes these days will use science as a justification for beating other people down or censoring viewpoints. And they'll say, look at the science, take a look at the science, you uneducated idiot. And it's a sort of vitriolic hate against people who have the gall to question science. But what I want to do is empower those people who are questioning science and get them to look into the results of what are happening, and to get everyone else to look into those results as well. And this is not just going to be good for the people who are doing that, it's going to be good for all of society, because the people, let's say, who believe that some scientific thing is manufactured, or that there's fraud in science, perhaps there is or isn't, and whenever they question, we will get a more clear picture as the public, and they will probably correct their views if they're given an opportunity to do that without being forced to. Whenever you force someone, they instantly recoil away from it, and they say, no, I don't want to do that, I want to hold on to my views. And there's a certain sort of justification there, that if they are being censored for expressing skepticism, there must be a reason for that. And so we want to flip that around and say, no, skepticism is important, you shouldn't be censored for it, and anyone who expresses skepticism should be given the tools and given the data to prove themselves either wrong or right.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. So how are you going to do it? Like, what is
the technical back end or the business back end? Which one should I focus on first?
I think the business first.
Okay, so the business back end of this is kind of simple, because every researcher that we've spoken to about our product, which is essentially two products wrapped into one system, is very excited about it. And so these two products we have are, one is a data transfer product. If I want to transfer data to another scientist in an encrypted method without any central servers being used due to some EU, let's say like the GDPR laws that have recently come into place, the General Data Protection Regulation, and in other countries there are very strict laws on data privacy, especially for medical data and healthcare data. And so we want to safeguard this data and open the process of sort of encrypted data sharing pipelines between scientists. And then we mesh this with a system of provenance, blockchain-based provenance, so that scientists can license their work and show that their work was licensed on a certain date, and even prove that their data was transferred to someone else. And this is important because whenever a scientist gives data to another person, it can be risky if that person were to take the data or steal the ideas that the other scientist has, and get a publication first. And then this is kind of like patenting. In many patenting systems, whoever files first is the owner of the patent, not who really came up with the idea. And I think that's flawed. And in science, that's sort of the way it is right now as well. And that's why there's a lack of collaboration. Scientists are sort of scared to collaborate. It's risky on a legal front. It's risky on a personal front. It's risky because they may not get the publication for the idea or the data which was originally theirs. And we want to open up this network of collaboration and then delinearize science. So to bring every piece of the scientific puzzle in from different teams and allow scientists to sort of mesh themselves together. And then the other part of this is essentially that, but on a broader scale, on an institutional level.
Can I just ask, for the people who don't know what blockchain is?
Yes.
What is the function of blockchain here?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and thank you for making me go into that a bit more. The blockchain aspect of this is actually pretty important, because the only way that we have to prove that this data was transmitted, and to prove that it was the data that was transmitted, and that it was transmitted at a certain date and between two different parties who have known addresses, is via a blockchain. And so a blockchain is essentially, you can think of it as a way, a ledger that every person on Earth holds. Not quite, but a lot of different computers on Earth replicate the same data set and verify it. And this is a secure process where data and times and hashes of data, which are sort of representations, the fingerprints of the data files, can be logged and permanently stored without the risk of that log being corrupted by someone else. So you can almost call it a type of outsourced trust. You're decentralizing the trust from one middleman, which may be us or another party in current systems, to middlemen that are 10,000 middlemen and have diverse interests, and therefore can't be corrupted by one interest or one
So
one
instead
point of view.
of, for example, having this data at a central ledger somewhere at a library or something like that, you put it on thousands of computers and make sure no one can tamper with this data.
Exactly, exactly. And that's important too when we get into things like cross-border transfers, because right now many institutions have transfer data systems that are within their borders, but these are all reliant on centralized servers and centralized systems, and they don't work for researchers who are outside of those borders. And so we need a system of internationalized outsourced trust, if you want to put it that way, that isn't also reliant on one big company, because we have to assume that everything is corruptible in this case. And while some people may disagree with that, it's not a inane notion, because any system is inherently corruptible. And more than that, it's not just about who is corruptible, it's about the fallibility, because any central system is also fallible. It can be destroyed, or it can be lost, or it can be misplaced, or the servers can go down, they cannot be accessible. With a blockchain, you essentially have such immense and such broad replication over so many distributed areas geographically that this data is essentially secure forever,
So
and
it's
can
much
be
more
referenced forever.
robust, maybe even anti-fragile.
Yes,
System. Yeah.
exactly. And it's an incredibly robust system. I mean, it's really protects against any sort of corruption on the outside. And then the other thing that we use the blockchain for here is verifying on both ends that the data is the same. So we can sort of, on the one end, push the data to the blockchain to a known place, and then on the other end, when the data is received, retrieve the hash from that blockchain and verify that the data was the same that was just transmitted. So it's a sort of triangulation of both identity verification and data verification, so that scientists can be absolutely sure that the data they're transferring is both secure and the original data that the other scientists sent.
It's very smart.
Thank you. Yes, and we're working on developing the system right now. We already have our desktop app essentially developed, and now we're working with other universities and library systems to get this system pushed out on a wider level and hopefully build sort of an international standard for back-end data sharing, because that's really the thing that's needed most, is internationalized standards and open standards, because right now the systems of data sharing and the systems of data access are so fractured and so diverse that there's no way to catalog all these on one place. And so the solution to that isn't to have a centralized service that provides all this, because there are millions of centralized services that are going right for this market space. The solution is to have a decentralized service where anyone can implement this standard and anyone can contribute to this federated network, as we call it, where all the universities are still separate, they still host their own data, and they can still even permission access to this data and keep this data private if need be. But they can also share this data very efficiently with other services without having to build some central indexing system that is also reliant on central servers and may be slow or fail or may not be accessible. And the other thing with an open standard is that we can circumvent the problems that are usually endemic to having one country be in control of these systems. So we don't want it just to be a US system or a German system or a Danish system or a Russian system. We want it to be an international system that anyone can use to contribute data to.
Yeah, totally neutral and open.
Exactly.
Standards.
Exactly. And the federated aspect is also important, because that way we build collaboration between scientists. And scientists really, they are not fundamentally opposed to each other. Almost all scientists want to work together and work for the ideals of what science really stands for. You know, a better, more copacetic world where we have access to data, where we have access to what's really going on. And scientists are not, bad people. They want the best for the world, the most of them.
But they have maybe conflict of incentives right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this conflict of incentives is really what we want to remove from the equation, so that scientists can be free to do their best work and to do work that may otherwise be censored or repressed, let's say, by larger journals or publishers or other systems of data sharing. Because there are many examples of this, but scientific censorship is certainly a problem as well, and the place that this usually happens is at the peer review board. When scientific data is pushed into a study and then the study is published, the peer review board is the one that oversees this publication process. And oftentimes on the peer review board you can have people who don't have the best interests in mind of the public, but rather of their own careers or the careers of companies that they are advisors to or on the boards of or shareholders of. And so when we can make this process more open and make the back end more open, it makes it extremely hard to be corrupt in this system, because anyone who is not being extremely transparent in their data and extremely transparent in their publishing process and their sharing of their final published studies will be immediately a suspect for corruption or maladjustion of data or is some other type of tampering, which may be hard to address in the current system, because there's no sort of push and market pressure for the data behind the science to be open.
So a lack of openness will automatically result in a lack of credibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
right.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, on an ending note, what is the long-term vision? I think you have gone over it a bit, but if you could just give like
a short summarization. Yeah. I mean, really, the long-term vision of Assembl is just to have a world where anyone can participate in science and where it's recognized that everyone is sort of inherently a scientist. We all love to question. We all love to explore and adventure. It's part of us as human beings. And we want to empower that instinct in everyone. And so this gets to the sort of long-term vision of what we can do with this technology. And one example is a sort of decentralized mesh of data collection and data analysis. So if I wanted, let's say, as a scientist, to collect data on the entire western seaboard of the United States, I wanted to collect data from San Diego all the way to Vancouver, let's say even. Right now, as an independent scientist, this is hard to do. And what's possible with a decentralized system is to dispatch scientists all along this coastline, collect data, get them to collect data, pay them and reward them for this data in some way, and then have this data sent back to a central repository or central place where it's analyzed and then published in a decentralized mesh. And that's really the ultimate goal, is to have citizen science, empowered science, where everyone is aware of scientific advancements and what's happening behind science, and has access to all the data behind science as well. And of course, within that, we also have all the advantages we outlined earlier: censorship resistant, an anti-fragile system, essentially an extremely robust and transparent open system that forces science to be open.
It all sounds really good. I can't wait to see where this goes.
Thank you. I can't either. And we have some exciting partnerships that we're working on right now, and we think that this will definitely become something in the next short amount of time. That's what we're angling for.
Really great. Really great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. If you'd like to visit our website, you can check us out at https://assembl.science.
Great. And I'll post the links in the blog post and footnotes.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds good. Jacob, really wonderful to spend the time with you. Thank you for taking
you
the time.
too, Sebastian.
All right.
Thank you.